Hello, and welcome to the Kathleen Spracklin podcast. I am a woman on a mission to help you get the Zettelkasten of your dreams on your work table beside you. Well, the question that I'm dealing with today is, what do you do when a clump of cards arrive in your Zettelkasten? They're related, they come right out of the source that you're reading, and they all kind of fit together. Do you keep them together when you put them in the Zettelkasten? How does that affect how you install those cards? The example that I'm using comes out of a newsletter. This is the Life Spiral newsletter by Ken Caputo and Stephanie Roy. It's a gem of just incredibly well thought out basic advice for life that you can really use, and not the standard cliches that you hear everywhere, which makes it really very interesting. If you're interested, by the way, you can check out their book. You can get it at spiraluplife.com, and this is a great introduction to their newsletter. It gives you the basis, sort of the basic information that you need to be able to get the most out of each newsletter. I know I look forward to each new letter as it arrives. And this is from the November 2024 letter that gives me a perfect example of dealing with a small clump of cards that arrives in the system at the same time. So come on over to the down-facing camera. I'll show you what I gleaned and that I wanted to capture into my Zettelkasten, and you can see from there how I handle the situation. We'll do it together. See you over there. Here's the newsletter issue that I'm working from. This one happens to be issue 7, and the material that I'm capturing for my Zettelkasten is summarized here on page 9 with the open mind checklist. They go on to develop the topic at great length, but I'm going to focus just on the cards that I made that summarize what this newsletter describes. In their newsletter, Ken and Stephanie recommend dividing the 9 questions that they propose you ask yourself into 3 groups of 3. I followed that, but I also included a header that captured all 3. And I'll show you why when it comes time to insert these cards into the Zettelkasten. But to give you a little bit of a background on what's going on, they're talking about how to get a hold of emotional reactions at the time that you feel them and insert some quick questions that you can prepare in advance and be ready to ask yourself the minute you feel or you detect that you've been triggered. This is pretty exciting because, of course, in the moment, that's no time to develop a game plan, but how handy it is to have something already canned that you've rehearsed in your mind ahead of time, so that if you catch yourself in one of these emotional situations, you have ability to react. It's very well timed in November because of the Thanksgiving dinners when family is around the table, and family's probably better at triggering one another than just about any other group, although I'm actually making these cards after Thanksgiving. So I captured, first of all, the general information about what they were going for and the headers of the 3 groups that they recommend dividing the questions up into. So I have the information from the source, I have my reaction to it, which I remember being advised at some stage to, if you're going to a party and you don't want to overindulge, to actually picture yourself at the party, what you're going to eat and what you're not going to eat, so that you're prepared and rehearsed in advance. Well, this is about how to prepare your emotional response so that you're ready in advance. So that's the lead card, and then each of the 3 sub areas to that card, with each one having its 3 questions summarized on separate main cards. Now, before I go place these cards into the Zettelkasten, let me give you some of the rationale for having this card. For one thing, it helps you to organize it in your mind, because 9 things are kind of a lot to absorb. 3 absorbs rather well. So if you make it 3 groups of 3, that's the reason they suggest breaking it up. But it's also nice to have an overarching summary of the 3 groups. There's another very quality reason for that, And that has to do with when you actually put these cards into the Zettelkasten. Because, as you know, we have a firm rule with the Zettelkasten. Each card independently gets to choose its own parent. How important is it to you that these stay together? I would say that they already are together, because if you've made a bib card, then these are all together on the bib card. And so there's no absolute requirement that they stay all together in your Zettelkasten. They may turn out that way, but there's no absolute requirement of it. Again, you have them all together on the bib card. But there's another value with this header card as well. Very naturally, if this were the only card in your Zettelkasten, none of these cards would be an orphan. They would all happily choose this card as their parent. So we've got a built-in possible parent for each of these three subcards. So once we place this card, we have a quality possible placement for each of the other three. But that's only a quality possible placement. Each of these cards gets to make up its own mind where it wants to go. And that's an absolute. So let's do it. Okay, so I'm positioned over my index, and I'm going to be looking for some of the keywords in this title. And if I don't have an exact match on the keywords, I'm going to be thinking about the concepts to see about placing this. So I think one of the keywords obviously is triggering is very big, because it's your response to being triggered that is the overarching component in all of these. But I don't think I have triggered in my Zettelkasten at this moment. I'm going to look for that first, and then I'm going to check out response. And I think prepare in advance. I like the tangential relationship, but I think it's the response and the triggering that are the ones that I want to match to, either on these keywords or on the notion involved in this. So I'm going to first look for triggering. Nope, no triggering as a word as a whole. How about under the general letter T? Nope, not in the general T's either. So let's try response. Ah, yes, I have a response card. So I'm going to pull that card to look at it more closely. This saves me from having to dig for it again when it's ready to go back. Okay, many of these have to do with my faith, but there's two here that are quite interesting. The bottom two, like I have here that the zone of awareness predicts the response to a struggle, and this is kind of a response to a struggle, so that one looks interesting. And the other one is reflect with the source through your response and your tagline. We know about taglines. This is the tagline. So this seems a little bit, shall we say, meta? Probably not as likely, but I'm going to log it. I'm going to log the two of those. But since both of those are rather tenuous, I'd like to dive in. Before I close off the search, I want to think a little bit about the concept that this card is talking about and see if I can find a card in my index that's related more to the general concept that's going on here. So there's kind of a lot of it has to do with how are you going to handle an emotional reaction. So I'm going to look up reaction and then possibly emotions. Well, there's no reaction as an individual word, so I'm going to look up the R's. You know, I didn't find it there, but I saw several cards that were talking about resilience. And this is definitely about how to create some resilience. So I thought that's one to take a look at. And no, mostly just the character trait group of resilience, nothing specifically about the response. Another avenue in here would be to talk about building a gap between what triggers you and your triggering response. So that might be a possibility. Okay, I can't turn up anything any better, so that means that I'm going to go with these two cards that I identified earlier, and we'll take a look at the two of them. Okay, this is a very general card that's just, I don't even seem to have a source for it. It says, take the reader through how to predict behavior based on the zone of awareness. So this looks like something that I created in the process of writing my book, Writing with Emotion, but I haven't got a date, which normally if I have a personal reflection, I include a date. So I guess this is rather not up to snuff here. But it says the zone of awareness will give power to understand emotions and make sense of them. So I do think this is falling in the zone of awareness. So I would say that this one is a possible parent. I don't really seem to have too many entry points into my system for these cards. So I'm going to mark that with a green check as being inadequate. And then I'm going to go pull the other card. Oh, now this one is very interesting. We had this card out just the other day. This is that from Robert Atherton during the Right to Freedom meeting, where he's talking about cognitive scaffolds and reflective thinking and writing. And a lot of what these 9 questions are doing are getting you to be able to reflect on the fly. Now, Robert is big on not letting your bare brain have to do all the burden. And I guess if you're just in a conversational situation and you have need of these response tools, you better build them at a time when it's not just your bare brain, and then commit them to memory so that when you need them and it is just you and your brain, you can draw on the past work that wasn't just your bare brain. So I'm going to indicate this as also a possible parent. Since both are possible parents, that means one will be a true parent and the other will be a link. In answering which one is going to be the actual one that it's adjacent to, I want to figure out what kind of conversations are going on. And here is the conversation that this card currently participates in. Yes, both of these seem to be very much dealing with the time when you're thinking, at the moment when you're in deep thought. So I think this is a good reference, but the other one, which is more directly related to the zone of awareness when you're in the situation, is the better actual parent. Although this one is sufficiently interesting that I will, this one will be a link. So that's where I'm going to go with this card. This one will have a link, and so I'll have to make a directory card for it. So I'll grab that to remind myself, and then I've got to go back to the other drawer to get the parent card for this one. Okay, so this fairly scattered card is still the best match. It does not have any children. It ends a line. And so our new card will just be 4B4F-1. So look at the conversation that we have going on. The zone of awareness predicts the response to struggle. Can you prepare your response to a trigger in advance? That is making a very intelligent conversation. So my task work now will be to index this card and to create a link to this card. But I'm going to set that aside for the moment because that's not our point tonight. My next point is, how am I going to end up placing these other 3 cards? Let's go back to our index. We already know that this card, pondering the actual language of a triggering message, calms, has a natural card that it would be happy to have as its parent. So we know we've got a parent in any case, but the question is, each card gets to choose its own parent, and we don't know what its actual choice will be until we look up language, triggering, and calming. We know already that we don't have anything there in triggering except for this. So this points back to this through this word. So language and calms will be the other 2 that we will want to take a look at for this card. I don't have calmed, but I'm pretty sure I have soothed. Here it is. It's the 4 S's of resilience. Secure, safe, seen, and soothed. So that looks like a potential match for this card. So now I have 2 possible matches for our card. The one that was the head of the group that just came in tonight, and this one. So now I have 2 possibilities. And the other word that I want to look up before deciding for sure will be that word language. And yes, I have quite a few entries on language, but these are all old entries, and look at these are all those cards that were just divider cards that were categories, broad categories, and there's nothing obvious that's going to go with my new cards. So that's it. This card has only 2 choices. One is the card it came in with, and we've got another one to pull to consider as an alternative. Well, it's very interesting, but it's kind of on the blank side. There's no response. It's like the tagline was all there was. So this is not going to be a likely match for this card. So the way it's ending up turning out with this card is that because this is a different sort of knowledge than what's currently predominates in my Zettelkasten, these cards are going to be probably making their own clump. Clearly this one is going to be have this card as its parent. So it'll just be card 1A. And now I want to do the same for the other two cards and see if there is any of them that wants to go in another direction. Okay, then when I tried that for the third card, I didn't get anything that was any better of a match than the original parent card. So this new card is going to be 4B4F-1B. However, when it came to the third card, the third group of 3 questions, it was a little bit broader because it was talking about information in general. And there are 3 questions to ask yourself, especially if you're triggered. But Caputo and Roy suggest asking the questions like how knowledgeable is the source? How does the source stand to benefit? And how safe is it to experiment around with this? And that gets me into a broader area. And in fact, this card with Julianne's quote on embracing your questions as power tools. This sure looks like questions as power tools to me. And in fact, there's already a pretty lively conversation going on here with regard to power tools. And it appears to me that this card would fit in beautifully with this group of questions about questions. So this card, this one is actually going to choose a different parent. It'll be 1M4B-4C. So I will have to add it to this directory card. So it will be added to the directory card. And of course, all of these will be indexed. But I won't let this group and this conversation go empty or be missing this card that so clearly completes the set. I will be making a directory card with this card heading up the directory and these 3 following. This one I'll have to put the full address because it's a link, and I'll indicate that it's a link. But then you will still have on your directory card all of the elements of the conversation. Okay, so now we have all of our conversation cards together. So let's take a look and review at what we have added to the Zettelkasten. Our lead card chose this card as its parent, but it also linked to this card by Robert Atherton. So now we have this conversation captured. Reflect with source through response and tagline. Can you prepare your response to triggering in advance? You can see that that's a bit of a stretch because the response to a tagline is a different kind of a response, but it does connect these 2 areas that were sufficiently interesting to make a note of it. But its primary conversation was with the card it chose as its parent. The zone of awareness predicts response to struggle. Can you prepare your response to triggering in advance? You can see that that's a more solid conversation than the other one. So now with this card placed, then we looked at the remaining 3 cards. 2 of the 3 chose this card that they came in with as their parent, and they were added to the directory. But the third card chose the Julianne quote for its parent, and so it got added to that conversation. And what an interesting conversation it is. Julianne says, embraced your questions as power tools. Our Zettelkasten cards are building blocks for novel thoughts. Really useful ideas inform and question are productive. Do we have new information? There are 3 questions to ask, especially if we're triggered. So that's a really interesting conversation, and yet this new card also participates in the conversation that it came in with by virtue of this link. And that's all of the response to being triggering that we introduced at the beginning of the video. So I hope that helps you understand the way you'll treat a group of cards that are closely associated at the time you bring them in. The bib card will continue for forever to keep them closely associated, but they also have the opportunity to associate in your Zettelkasten, or they also have the opportunity to scatter. And because that is the very nature of a Zettelkasten, is you want your ideas to mix beautifully. The links will keep things together because that card clearly belonged to two different conversations. One conversation on what are you going to do mentally when you want to intervene because you've detected that you've been triggered. You've got 3 strategies. One of the strategies is questioning. And also that question card belongs to a different conversation over the value of questions in general and how questions can be power tools. So that is the power of the Zettelkasten, is that it can participate in both places. And if you use the directory cards, the full conversation is immediately and directly visible in both places. So I hope you enjoyed this video. Talk to you later. Bye-bye.